initial failures of Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters in battles with Soviet I-15s and I-16s in the skies of Spain, and the desire to protect themselves from similar troubles in the future, prompted the Luftwaffe Command to hold a competition in 1938 to create a more powerful fighter. The Focke-Wulf Company took part in this competition, presenting a project of a fighter with a radial air-cooled engine made by BMW called the 139. The aircraft designer Kurt Tank used an air-cooled engine, which was deemed unfashionable at the time, and despite its large cross-section and, accordingly, lesser aerodynamic resistance, having an exceptionally high engine power, producing 1,530 horsepower, will provide the aircraft with excellent characteristics. The first fight of the prototype FW190 aircraft took place in June 1939, and the subsequent tests generally confirmed the calculations of the designers. The speed at an altitude of 5,000 meters was 595 kilometers an hour, compared to 550 kilometers an hour for the newest modifications of the Bf-109E3. The aircraft possessed good maneuverability and ease of control, and improved landing stability compared to the Bf-109, provided by a solid chassis with a wide track. Some problems arose only due to the engine overheating, which caused the temperature in the cabin to rise to 55 degrees Celsius during the flight. However, the delay in the development of the aircraft arose for another reason. BMW suggested using a more powerful and promising BMW 801 engine instead of the BMW 139. The engine was longer and much heavier, which required a redesign of the subframe, moving the cockpit 300 millimeters towards the aft fuselage and significantly strengthening landing gear. All this entailed many less significant changes, so that the first flight of the Focke-Wulf FW190 V5 with a new engine took place only in the spring of 1940. The aircraft successfully passed tests and was put to mass production after some changes were made to its design, the main one of which, perhaps, was an increase in the wingspan by 1 meter to improve maneuverability. The aircraft was an all-metal monoplane, with a low wing and tricycle landing gear, with a tailwheel retractable in flight. The fuselage of a semi-monocoque design consisted of 3 pressurized compartments: the engine compartment, the tail compartment, and the cockpit compartment. The engine compartment, as a rule, were manufactured at engine factories and were supplied with hoods, oil coolers, oil tanks, and necessary pipes. At aircraft factories, they were riveted to the cockpit compartments and tail compartments made there. The design of the aircraft wing was also well developed in terms of manufacturing technology. It consisted of 2 parts, upper and lower, each of which was assembled by high-performance open riveting of sheathing panels to the frame. Both parts of the wing were also connected by riveting, and the wing ends and leading edge parts were fastened with screws. The advantages of such a wing design were fully manifested at the final stage of the Second World War, when it was necessary to deploy mass production of fighters to combat enemy aircraft. The FW190 cockpit was designed with the usual desire to provide the pilot with the best conditions for combat. Most of the FW190 aircraft were equipped with a 14-cylinder air-cooled radial engine BMW 801. During production, the engine was constantly improved, and the power it developed increased from 1,560 to 1,700 horsepower. By the beginning of 1944, when the possibility of increasing the power of the BMW 801 engine was exhausted, the aircraft was equipped with a water-cooled Jumo 213 engine with a capacity of 2,240 horsepower. The engines were equipped with metallic 3-blade automatic propellers with a diameter of 3,300 millimeters. The work of the entire propeller group was largely automated. The first modifications of the fighter had 2 synchronized 7.92 millimeter MG-17 machine guns over the engine, 2 synchronized 20 millimeter MG-151 cannons, and 2 unsynchronized 20 millimeter MG-FF cannons. Later, after replacing 7.92mm machine guns with 20mm cannons, and after installing more powerful cannons in the wings, including a 30mm caliber cannon. In addition to powerful machine gun and cannon armament, a very solid bomb load could be placed on the Focke-Wulf FV190 variation. Depending on the modification of the aircraft, bombs weighing up to 700 to 1,000 kilograms could be suspended on external suspension devices, and in the reloading version, up to 1,800 100 kilograms. Group 2 JG-26 was the first among combat units to receive the FW190A aircraft in the summer of 1941. From September, it took part in the battle over the English Channel. Then the rearmament of the JG-2 squadron group began. In 1942, the FW190A rearmed JG-1, which was also operating in the West. From the second half of 1942, the Focke-Wulf units began to be involved in intercepting American bombers over French territory. On the Eastern Front, the FW190A appeared in the late autumn of 1941, when several of the machines were transferred to the replenishment of the 2 JG-54 group operating in the Rev area. But the lack of knowledge of the engine cooling system did not allow them to be included in combat work. Hey, if you enjoyed the video so far, be sure to give it a like and don't forget to subscribe. During Operation Citadel, 4 armed groups with FW190s operated in the northern face of Kursk Bulge. At the beginning of the battle, they numbered 168 aircraft deep. The Focke-Wulfs successfully used the tactics of blocking the area of action of their strike aircraft, which turned out to be more effective than direct escort bombers. Making 3-4 sorties per day, German pilots operated in large groups, tying up or destroying small detachments of Soviet fighters. However, their losses were also significant. In particular, after the failure of the Citadel, Group 4 JG-51 had to be re-equipped from FW-190A to the inferior BF-109G. However, in the subsequent battles of the autumn and winter of 1943 and 44, Focke-Wulfs were used more intensively than Messerschmitts, as the FW-190A were more suited for operations from wet unpaved airfields. From the spring of 1943, units armed with FW-190 were included in the Reich Air Defense System. Single-engine fighters without radar used the tactics of a wild boar during the night interceptions, operating in searchlight fields, in addition to conventional fighter units. In July 1944, assault detachments in groups appeared as part of the air defense. They had FW-190A with reinforced armor and were used to attack formations of enemy bombers in daytime from a minimum distance. The participation of the FW-190A in an attempt to repel the Allied landings in Normandy turned out to be very insignificant. By June 1944, there were only 4 groups of such aircraft in France, moreover, incompletely equipped, and it was not possible to allocate additional forces by removing them from the Eastern Front or the air defense of the Reich. From the entire campaign 1944-1945, in the West, the most noticeable episode of the combative use of the Focke-KE Wolves was Operation Bondenplatte, a massive attack on Allied airfields on July 1st, 1945, in which 16 groups of FW-190s took part. The FW-190D9 aircraft appeared in combat units in the fall of 1944. In the beginning of 1945, the FW-190D9s appeared in the Eastern Front. In particular, Group 2 JG-6 operated on them, and in the last weeks of the war, 4 JG-51, rearmed from Messerschmitts. Deliveries of FW-190F to combat units began at the end of 1942. In December, they were received by 2 detachments of the Luftwaffe. They went into battle on the Eastern Front of March 1943, when, based in Pavlograd, supported the counteroffensive of the Wehrmacht in the Donbass. In addition to the formations of enemy troops and artillery positions, fighter aircraft struck at railway junctions and airfields. As a rule, 2 runs were carried out. In the first, bombs were dropped, and in the second, the target was fired upon by cannons and machine gun. The losses incurred in the battles were quickly compensated for by the industry, and by the summer of 1943, a squadron already had 5 FW-190F units. In early July, the squadron had 85 such aircraft. Concentrated on airfields in the Belgorod area of Russia, they actively participated in the Battle of Kursk. After the transition of the Soviet troops to counteroffensive, aviation became one of the main means of deterring the enemy's advance. The Luftwaffe switched to combined strikes involving large groups of different types of aircraft, in which the FW-190F operated at a lower echelon, 1,500 to 2,000 meters. Their main task was to suppress anti-aircraft artillery and to support the actions of bombers. During July-August 1943, 102 FW-190Fs were lost on the Eastern Front, with one loss accounting for about 50 sorties. The Focke-Wulf FW-190G debuted in the battle in the West. In January-February 1943, they armed a squadron of SKG-10 high-speed bombers. From March, FW-190Gs began to raid on ports and other objects on the coast of England. From mid-April, along with daytime operations, night raids began began to be practiced. At the same time, a small group of aircraft was previously sent out to divert the enemy's night fighters to themselves, and an hour later, the enemy strike group. At the end of 1943, the main attack aircraft forces were concentrated on the Eastern Front. The intensification of aviation operations was observed with the beginning of the spring weather improvement in 1944. A squadron in full force of over 100 aircraft was concentrated in the area of Yassy in Russia. In May 1944, its aircraft actively opposed the Soviet offensive, performing the tasks of not only attack aircraft, but also fighters. In the spring and early summer of 1944, the number of assault units that received the FW190 increased significantly. First, in the central sector of the Eastern Front in Belarus, and then in the Baltic states. On June 6, 1944, she participated in beats at the bridgehead in Normandy, losing 10 to 2/3 its aircraft, and after the reorganization, was transferred to the Eastern Front. In the fall of 1944, the Baltic region remained the main area for the use of fighter aircraft, but by the end of the year, many units were concentrated in Hungary. In the beginning of 1945, the Luftwaffe had 1,331 fighter aircrafts, of which 1,077 were FW190. Most of them operated on the Eastern Front. Directly in combat units, excluding training and spare, there were about 500 FW190, while on the Western Front and in northern Italy, only 160 of these machines. They took part in all operations of the final period of the war, even in the last months of the war. Luftwaffe attack aircraft operated in large groups of 20 to 40, and sometimes up to 60 vehicles, from time to time causing significant damage to Soviet troops. The supplies of equipment from the factories made it possible to maintain the composition of the squadrons at a sufficient level. For example, the Squadron Group 77 operated in the Berlin area at the beginning of April 1945, had 110 FW-190F aircraft, but there was a shortage of experienced pilots. Nevertheless, in the West, the most active night assault group, armed with FW-190F8 and G3s, its aircraft in December 1944 supported the offensive in the Ardennes, and on January 1st, 1945, participated in Operation Bodenplatte, a massive Luftwaffe attack on Allied airfields. The only country to which the FW-190A fighters were supplied was Turkey, which received 72 of them during 1942 to 1943. FW-190A A3 aircraft were operated until 1948. For testing, 2 FW-190A were delivered to Japan. 72 FW-190F aircraft were received by the Hungarian Air Force. Since November 1944, they served as part of the 102nd Fighter Bomber to March 1945 Assault Group, which took part in battles until the last days of the war, when there were only 2 serviceable aircraft left in it. Several VF-190Fs were captured by Romania after switching to the side of the anti-Hitler coalition. They were not used in the battle, though. In battles with the Soviet LA-5, Focke-Wulfs showed much better maneuverability and higher speed characteristics. The Yaks outnumbered the FW-190A in horizontal maneuver at altitudes of less than 3,000 meters, but lost it to them when higher. Excellent reputation among Luftwaffe pilots was enjoyed by the FW-190D9, considered the best German fighter to be sent to the front in any noticeable number. The rearmament of the Luftwaffe assault units from Ju-87 to FW-190F or G, undertaken in the middle of the war, allowed these units to carry out combative missions without fighter cover. The pilots of the FW-190 achieved the greatest success when performing attacks using small and medium caliber bombs, as well as powerful small arms and cannon weapons to defeat various, primarily unarmored, targets in the near Soviet rear. Also, they carried out missions to cover the dive bombers and conducted tactical reconnaissance. Thus, the FW-190 proved not only to be a good fighter, but also an excellent multi-purpose aircraft. Anyway, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the video, remember to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you can see when we put other stuff out. Y'all have a good one.